You know what type of build I don't think needs any more buffs? Yeah, it's the bleed builds. Well, it seems From Software is not of the same opinion, and they actually added a full armor set in the new DLC that buffs the damage of bleed skills and bleed Ashes of War even more than they already are. So today, ladies and gents, we're going to take a look at an updated bleed build for Shadow of the Erdtree, as well as some of the tests that I've made, so let's jump right in. So to make the most out of it, you're going to need the Ansbach armor set, which you will get from Sir Ansbach questline, specifically once you finish pretty much the whole DLC, defeat the final boss, and also side with him against Leda, meaning that you're going to lose out on Leda's items. But you do get this armor set. An alternative route would be to just defeat Ansbach the moment you notice him spawning at the Shadow Keep. In that case, you only get to keep the armor set, but you do lose out on some of the other items he would have given you at the end of his questline, such as the obsidian lamina. That being said, the Ansbach attire and the remaining pieces of the set actually are really strong. They provide an extra 3% damage increase to all the Blood Oath and Dynastic skills. So this includes all Ashes of War, and specifically the weapon skills on these items right here. So that includes the Bloody Slash, Blood Blade, Blood Tax, as well as the following weapons, including Rivers of Blood, Eleonora's Pole Blade, Reduvia, Blood Hellis, and finally the Obsidian Lamina. So in total, that's going to be a 12% damage increase for all of these bleed abilities, which is actually going to be even higher compared to the Rakshasa set that gives you a 2% per piece for all damage. So the difference specifically for these blood abilities is going to be a 4% in favor of the Ansbach armor. As you probably noticed, it consistently pulls ahead of the Rakshasa set on literally every test that I've made, on all of the Ashes of War, and all the special skills on the aforementioned weapons. That is because you get that higher 4% additional damage on top. But in this case, you would not be going with the full armor set anyway. You're going to be coupling this with a white mask of Vare, which is going to provide you a 10% damage instead of the 3%, but only once the bleed buildup actually happens, which overall is still going to be a much higher damage increase, and typically that's going to be the sacrifice that you're going to have to make. You're going to have to use the white mask instead. So the weapon combo plus Ash of War I'm suggesting here is going to be, of course, the Blood Tax, which is already a very strong ability, and using this with the new Great Katana. Now, why this weapon and not something else? Like, for example, even one of the new Blood Fiend's forks that we covered before. Well, pretty simple. A, because Great Katanas are amazing. B, because they have a very great reach, being this big and having a lot of poke attacks. And C, their arcane scaling when placed on an occult affinity is actually going to be much higher, and it still retains a lot of that bleed buildup. In this case, we're going to reach a B scaling with arcane stats compared to having only a C in dexterity when having the bleed affinity on. Even if we are just missing slightly bit more bloodlust buildup, it's still going to be really high, over 100, and we're going to have a much better attack rating when having 70 points into arcane compared to the 70 point variant of dexterity and going with the other affinity. So in this case, your damage is going to be great, the blood tax has a very great reach, and you also survive for so long because you're going to essentially heal through most of the attacks in the game. But not all abilities and skills related to blood get boosted by the Ansbach set. Like, for example, none of the bleed incantations nor the briar spells actually get any benefit from having that armor equipped. Rakshasa on the other hand might, since that boosts all damage. Neither will Seppuku as an Ash of War for obvious reasons, nor will the Bloodboon Ritual on the Mogwin Sacred Spear. That one doesn't get boosted by the Ansbach set at all. However, you can use the Rakshasa set on this one, and it's going to benefit from that 8% damage increase when going with the full Rakshasa set, but that's because, again, it boosts all damage. But all in all, this just means that weapons that were already strong are now even better. I went ahead with the Blood Hellis and I really like it in the DLC, specifically because of the way it incorporates those iframes at the start of the chain. It's really good, the reach is great, and now you deal even more damage with all of these sources. It can actually trivialize some of the starting boss fights because of the way you can incorporate that dodge at the beginning of the special attack animation. Outside of that, you also have a new option in the DLC which looks cooler than it is useful. It's the Obsidian Lamina, and again, you get it by completing that Ansbach storyline. But this is going to come with that Dynastic Sick Play Ash of War / skill. And I kind of like this, but I also hate it. On one side, it incorporates two iframe moments, one at the start of the Astral Forecast and the second at the end of the Art to Heavy follow-up. So you can actually use this and kind of make this dance that can work against some of the bosses, but it's a little bit too like random. So sometimes you can just dodge all the attacks from the enemies, but other times everything hits you and you just dodge at the wrong moment. So it's very iffy, and I would consider this better in PvP than in PvE. However, the bleed build-up is really good. Its scaling is really awesome. You do need to go full on dex with this because of the beast scaling and dexterity. But yeah, if this was buffed in some way, I could see it becoming even better, because I mean, it looks so freaking awesome. Now, the only other downside I want to focus on is that even though you are kind of gaining a bit of extra non-physical damage bonus compared to the Rakshasa, your physical damage bonus is going to be lower even compared to it. Or at least comparable. It's not going to be much of a difference, but you should know about it. Besides this, the poise is going to be much lower than having a full Rakshasa set. It's only like 27, sub 30 in any case compared to the 51 plus, compared to having even like 3 pieces of the Rakshasa. Obviously at a much more different equip load, but it's still something you should know. Your alternative would be to just sacrifice the chest piece and go for something like the Armor of Solitude or any of the other heavier armors that make up for that reduction in poise, and maybe push it over 50, assuming that you really want that. So here is how the bleed build looks like. We're going to use the Occult Great Katana. We're going to use that blood tax on it. Besides this, you can also go with some of the other weapons. As I mentioned before, it depends on your choice. Rivers of Blood can work just as great, but depending on the weapon, and especially if you're going with some of the other options, you might want to switch to Dexterity instead. Like for example, if you were to go with something like Eleanor's Pole Blade, you might want to switch it up to Dexterity, and same is with Rivers of Blood, but that depends on your option. But besides this, we're using that full-on Ansbach armor set. We do need the 4 pieces of the set, and instead of the helmet, we're going to use the white mask. As I've said, we do get a 10% damage increase on Bloodlust buildup compared to only 3. So in total, that's going to be 19% extra damage compared to having only 12. Besides this, in the talisman slot, we use Lord of Blood Exaltation. We cause a lot of bleed build-up, so that's going to help with another 10%. Shard of Alexander, another 15%, since we do use weapon skills and Ashes of War. Since we use Blood Tax, Rotten Winged Sword Insignia, as well as Millicent Prosthesis can work really great on the multi-hit. It greatly raises that attack power all the time, so your uptime on all these buffs is going to be really high. And the final one is going to be the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman. I always prefer this when I don't really know what to put in the final slot. It just helps a ton with more damage mitigation, helps a ton in the DLC, but you can switch for more, for example, damage if you want to create a full glass cannon build. And that's pretty much it with the build. In terms of the stat distribution, we're going with the following: 60 points into Vigor, 16 Mind is more than enough, of course 28 Endurance, maybe even pushing to 30 a bit, since we're going to have that blood tax be quite costly on our endurance. Only going with 14 points into Strength, or 24 if you're going to plan on using that Mogwin Spear, but like I said, it's not going to benefit from the Ansbach set. 50 Dexterity and also 70 Arcane is going to be plenty enough, and your damage is going to be amazing, but Dexterity can be sacrificed a little bit if you want to. The only other thing I wanted to mention is that right now the Blood Boon Ritual not getting boosted by the Ansbach set seems like a bug. It should definitely be one of the abilities getting boosted by it. I don't see a reason for that not to happen, which means that maybe in the future the Mogwin Sacred Spear will get an indirect buff out of this. Who knows, maybe we will have another Dread Talisman plus Blasphemous Blade situation where the base variant weapon gets nerfed to make up for the new damage increase in the DLC. But that's just speculation on my part. That is pretty much it. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.